The first time I knew my father had truly chosen her over me was not the day he remarried. It was not the day he sold my mother's piano without asking. It was the morning of my brother's wedding, when I walked into St. Bartholomew's Church in a navy dress I had ironed 3 times, and I saw my name card lying face down on a small table near the back wall. I stood there for a moment, holding my purse against my stomach, reading the name a second time as if the letters might rearrange themselves. Regan Whitfield. Row 14. Seat 9. Row 14 was almost at the rear of the chapel, behind 2 pillars, behind the great-aunts who only came out for funerals, behind a cousin I had not seen since I was 11. From row 14, you could not see the altar. You could only see the back of 200 heads and the stained glass window that depicted St. Michael with his sword raised. My older brother, Caleb, was getting married that afternoon. I was his only full sibling. Our mother, before she died, had made him promise that no matter what life did to us, we would stay close. He had whispered it to me at her bedside when I was 19 and he was 23. We protect each other, Regan. Always. I had carried that promise like a small stone in my pocket for the next 12 years. And yet, on the day of his wedding, my seat in the front row, the seat reserved for immediate family, had been given to my stepsister, Camille. I did not need to ask why. I could already see her at the front, in a powder pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, leaning into my father's shoulder. Laughing the way people laugh when they know they are being watched and loved. My father had not even come to greet me at the door. I picked up the small place card and turned it over slowly in my fingers. The handwriting was Camille's. I would have recognized those tall, looping letters anywhere. She had once decorated my own birthday cake with that same handwriting, back when she was 16 and still pretending to like me. Regan, sweetheart, there you are. My stepmother, Diane, appeared beside me in a cloud of perfume that always smelled like overripe peaches. She put one hand on my elbow, light enough to seem caring, firm enough to steer. We had a little seating mix-up. Your father thought it would be nicer if Camille sat up front with us, since she's been so involved in the planning. You understand, don't you? You've always been the practical one. The practical one. That was the title my family had quietly assigned me sometime in my late 20s, the way other families assign titles like the smart one, the funny one, the favorite. The practical one meant the one who could be moved. The one who would not complain. The one who would understand. I'd like to speak to my brother, I said. Diane's smile thinned by a single degree. He's getting ready. You really shouldn't bother him. Just take your seat, honey. It's such a beautiful day. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about you. 5 words I had heard my entire adult life. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I walked to row 14, sat down beside a great-aunt who smelled like mothballs, and folded my hands in my lap. The organ began to play. Sunlight poured through St. Michael's sword, and a small rainbow trembled on the marble floor. I did not yet know that in exactly 47 minutes, the doors of that church would open, and 200 United States Marines in dress blues would walk down the aisle in 2 perfect columns. I did not know that my father, sitting in my chair, would turn around so fast he would knock a hymnal off the pew. I did not know that the man at the head of the formation, a colonel with 3 rows of ribbons on his chest, would stop at row 14, look down at me, and address me by a name nobody in that church had ever heard before. But that comes later. For now, I simply sat in the seat I had been given, and I waited. To understand how I ended up in row 14, you have to understand what my family thought of me. My mother, Eleanor Whitfield, died of pancreatic cancer when I was 17. She was a high school music teacher with long, careful fingers and a quiet faith that she practiced more in kitchens than in churches. My father, Raymond, was a regional sales manager for an industrial parts company. He was a man who measured love in birthday cards and Christmas bonuses, and who never quite knew what to do with grief. He remarried 14 months after my mother's funeral. Diane was a divorced realtor with bleached hair and a teenage daughter named Camille. They moved into our house 6 weeks after the wedding. My mother's piano, the Steinway upright she had played every Sunday afternoon since before I was born, was sold within the year. Diane said it took up too much space in the living room. I was a freshman in college when Caleb called to tell me. I drove home that weekend and stood in the empty corner of the living room, staring at the 4 small dents in the carpet where the piano legs had pressed for 2 decades. My father came in, saw me, and said, "Reagan, don't be dramatic. It's just an old piano." That was the moment I understood that my mother's memory would have to live somewhere other than that house. Caleb adjusted faster than I did. He was older, busier, already engaged to a girl named Marissa who he eventually broke up with. He worked in commercial real estate. He liked Diane because Diane brought networking dinners and warm introductions to wealthy clients. He tolerated Camille because Camille was charming in the loud, sparkling way that made other men feel important. I did not adjust. I went back to college, and then I left. Not just for a semester. I left. I joined the United States Marine Corps 3 weeks before my 20th birthday. I did not tell my father in person. I left him a letter on the kitchen counter and drove to the recruiting office in my mother's old Honda Civic. When he finally called me, 2 days later, his voice was flat. "The Marines, Reagan? Really? You couldn't have picked something more sensible?" "It's sensible to me," I said. "You're just running away," he said. "You always run when things get hard. Your mother coddled you." "I'm not going to." I hung up. I did not call him back for almost 2 years. What my father never understood, and what I never quite explained, was that I did not join the Marines to run away from him. I joined because for the first time in my life, I wanted to be part of something that did not measure my worth by how quiet I could be. I did well. Better than well. I started in intelligence, moved into logistics, and eventually into something more specialized that I am not allowed to discuss in detail. I deployed 3 times. I learned 5 languages well enough to interrogate in 2 of them. I was promoted faster than most of the men around me, and I learned to wear the small surprise on their faces like a coat I had earned. By the time I was 30, I held a rank and a position that my father could not have guessed if you gave him 100 tries. I had a security clearance most senators do not have. I had a command. I had a corridor in a building in Virginia where men twice my age stood up when I walked in. But to my family, I was still the practical one. The one who had run away. The one who never came home for Christmas. The one who sent generic cards and short phone calls. I had tried, in the beginning, to share parts of my life. I told my father once, for years in, that I had been awarded a commendation. He said, That's nice, honey. Camille just got engaged. Did Diane tell you? The ring is gorgeous." I told him another time, 6 years in, that I had been deployed somewhere dangerous. He said, Well, you chose that life." After a while, I stopped telling him anything. Caleb was different. Caleb knew. Not everything, but enough. He had visited me once at Quantico, seen the way other officers addressed me, watched the small, sharp respect in their eyes. He had said, on the drive back to the hotel, Regan, you know Dad has no idea who you are, right? I had said, I know. He had said, do you want me to tell him? I had said, no. Not until it matters. I did not know, the morning of his wedding, that it was finally going to matter. What I did know, sitting in row 14 with a great-aunt's elbow pressing into my ribs, was that my brother had asked me, 6 months earlier, to do something for him. Something he had not told our father about. Something that would, in less than an hour, walk through the front doors of St. Bartholomew's Church in 2 perfectly aligned columns of dress blue. But before I tell you what he asked, I need to tell you about the rehearsal dinner. The rehearsal dinner was the night before the wedding, at a restaurant called Henley's, a place with low brass lights and waiters who whispered. My father had picked it. Diane had approved it. Camille had picked the menu. I arrived 20 minutes early in a charcoal blouse and slacks, the most civilian outfit I owned that still made me feel like myself. I do not wear my uniform to family events. I never have. The core is not a costume. Caleb met me at the door and hugged me hard. He looked tired. He always looked tired in the months before the wedding, but that night there was something underneath the tiredness, something I recognized but could not yet name. He held my shoulders for a moment longer than usual and said, Thank you for coming, Reeg. Thank you. I mean it. Of course I came, I said. He looked over my shoulder, at the table where Diane and Camille were already laughing too loudly with my future sister-in-law's parents, and he said, very quietly, sit next to me tonight. Please. No matter where they put your card. I did. I moved the place card. Diane noticed and pressed her lips together, but she did not say anything in front of the bride's family. The dinner was fine, in the way that family dinners are fine when everyone has decided not to fight. My father gave a short toast about Caleb that mentioned Caleb's career, Caleb's character, and Caleb's mother twice, but the mother he mentioned was Diane. He never said Eleanor's name. He never said my mother's name. He raised his glass to the woman who had been in my brother's life for 14 years, not the woman who had carried him for 9 months and rocked him through ear infections and taught him to read. Caleb's jaw tightened. I watched it tighten. I watched him take a slow sip of water and set the glass down without looking at me. Then Camille stood up. Camille was 32, 2 years older than me, although she dressed and behaved as if she were 24. She worked in something she called brand consulting, which as far as I could tell meant she had a large following on social media and a small list of clients she alternately courted and complained about. She had the kind of beauty that photographs well and ages quickly, and she had decided, somewhere around age 20, that she would be the daughter of the family. She raised her champagne glass and smiled at the table the way a politician smiles at a crowd. I just want to say, as she began, that I am so honored to be part of this family. Caleb has been like a brother to me for 14 years. And Regan, as she turned to me, and her smile shifted by a fraction. Regan, I know we don't see you very often, and I know your job is, very mysterious and very important. But I just want you to know that we miss you. We really do. We just wish you'd been around more. For Dad. For Caleb. For all of us. The table went quiet. Diane was nodding slowly, the way she nodded when she wanted to underline a point. I felt my father's eyes on me. I did not look at him. I looked at Camille, and I smiled the small, polite smile I had learned to use in rooms where smiling was a kind of armor. Thank you, Camille, I said. That means a lot. It did not mean a lot. It meant nothing. But I had learned, somewhere between my second deployment and my third, that there is no battle worth fighting in a restaurant. Caleb, beside me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand. He squeezed it hard. Hard enough that I knew he was furious. Hard enough that I knew he had decided something. Later, in the parking lot, while Diane and Camille were inside saying their goodbyes, Caleb walked me to my rental car. The night air was cold. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was looking at the asphalt. "Reagan," he said, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to say yes." "What is it?" "Tomorrow," he said. "At the church. I want them there." I knew exactly who he meant. We had talked about it once, 2 months earlier, half as a joke. I had laughed and said, "Caleb, that is not how it works. You do not summon a Marine honor guard like a band." And he had said, "Reeg, you are not just any Marine. You and I both know that." I looked at him in the parking lot, and I saw that his eyes were wet. "Why?" I asked. He swallowed. "Because Dad needs to see you," he said. "Because he has spent 14 years acting like you are less than her. And I am tired of it. And tomorrow, in front of God and Mom's memory, I want him to understand what he threw away. Just once. I want him to see who his daughter actually is." I did not say yes right away. I did not say no, either. I said, "Let me think." He nodded. He hugged me again, and he walked back into the restaurant. I sat in my rental car for almost an hour with my hands on the wheel and the engine off. I thought about my mother, and the piano, and the empty corner of the living room. I thought about Camille's toast. I thought about the small, dismissive way my father had said your job is very mysterious through Camille's mouth, like a complaint repeated in a softer voice. I thought about every Christmas card I had sent, and every Christmas card I had not received. And then I thought about what I had built. The unit. The men and women I had led. The corridor in Virginia where people stood up when I walked in. I made a phone call at 11:17 p.m. I made a second one at 11:43. I made a third at 12:08. By 2 a.m., it was done. I drove back to my hotel, and I slept for 4 hours. When I woke up, I ironed my navy dress 3 times. I want to tell you, before I tell you what happened next, that I almost called it off. I almost picked up the phone at 7 a.m. and undid every arrangement. Because as I stood in front of the hotel mirror, putting in my mother's small pearl earrings, I felt a thing I had not expected to feel. I felt sorry for my father. Not sorry enough to forgive him. Not sorry enough to forget. But sorry, in a small and stubborn way, for the man he was going to become in the next 2 hours. Because I knew, the way you know the weather is about to change, that he was about to lose something that he had not even realized he owned. I did not call it off. I drove to St. Bartholomew's. I parked 3 blocks away. I walked in through the side door, the way I had been told to. And I went to find my seat. That is when I saw the name card lying face down on the table near the back wall. That is when Diane appeared with her peach perfume and her gentle steering hand. That is when I was told, politely, that I had been moved to row 14 because Camille had been so involved in the planning. I want you to understand something. The seat itself did not matter. I have sat in worse places than row 14 of a small-town church. I have sat in a cargo hold of AC 130 for 9 hours with 2 broken ribs. I have sat in a debrief room for 14 hours straight after losing a man I had trained for 2 years. The seat did not matter. What the seat meant mattered. The front row of a wedding is reserved for the family of the bride and groom. For the parents. For the siblings. It is a small, public symbol that says these are the people who belong to this person. By moving me to row 14, my father was not just rearranging chairs. He was telling everyone in that church, every aunt, every cousin, every old family friend, every co-worker of Caleb's, that I was not really part of the family. That Camille was. I sat in row 14. The great aunt next to me, Aunt Pearl, my mother's older sister, looked at me, then at the front row, then back at me. Her mouth tightened. "That's not right," she said quietly. "It's fine, Aunt Pearl." "It's not fine, Reagan." "That's not right." She reached into her purse and took out a handkerchief, the kind my mother used to carry, with small embroidered violets in the corner. She pressed it into my hand without looking at me. "Your mother would have walked up there and dragged him out by the ear," she said. I almost laughed. "I know. You should do it for her." "I'm doing something else for her," I said. Aunt Pearl looked at me with the same searching expression she had given me at my mother's funeral, when I was 17 and had not cried once. She did not ask what I meant. She just nodded, slowly, and put her hand over mine. The organ shifted into the prelude. The doors at the back of the church opened, and the bride's mother was escorted to her seat. Then the groom's mother, Diane, in a cream-colored suit, walking on my father's arm. She did not look at me as she passed row 14. Neither did he. Camille was already seated in the front row. My seat. She turned around once, scanning the crowd, and her eyes found me. She smiled the small, satisfied smile of a person who has won something she did not earn. I smiled back. It was not the smile she expected. Caleb came out from the side door with the pastor. He stood at the altar in his black tuxedo, his hands clasped in front of him, and he looked across the crowd until he found me. He nodded. I nodded back. The pastor cleared his throat to begin the welcome. He never got the chance. Because at that moment, exactly when the second hand of the church clock above the altar passed the 12, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church swung open. And the first column of Marines stepped inside. There is a particular sound a Marine in dress blues makes when he walks. It is not loud. It is not soft. It is the sound of a heel striking a hard surface with absolute control, a sound that has been practiced 10,000 times until it no longer requires thought. When one Marine walks, it is a heartbeat. When 200 walk in step, it is something else entirely. It is a thing the human nervous system recognizes before the human mind does. The first heel struck the marble floor of St. Bartholomew's at 2:01 p.m. on a Saturday in October. The pastor stopped speaking mid-syllable. Heads turned. Slowly at first, then all at once. A woman 2 pews ahead of me gasped softly and put her hand to her mouth. A man near the front muttered, "What in the world?" The first column came down the left aisle. The second column came down the right. They were perfectly aligned. White covers under their arms, white gloves at their sides, dress blue coats with the red blood stripe down the trousers, gold buttons catching the light from the stained glass window. Their faces were absolutely still. They did not look at the crowd. They did not look at each other. They looked straight ahead. At the head of the left column was a man I had served under for 3 years and then served beside for 2 more. Colonel Marcus Hale. 48 years old. 3 combat tours. A father of 3 daughters. The kind of officer who never raised his voice because he had never needed to. At the head of the right column was a younger officer, Major Trish Okafor, who had been my executive officer for the last 18 months. She had flown in from Camp Lezan that morning on 6 hours of notice. She had not asked why. She had said, what time do you need us? Behind them, the columns kept coming. 40 Marines. 80. 120. The doors of the church kept opening, and they kept coming. I want to tell you what my father's face did in that moment, because I have replayed it in my mind many times since. He turned around in his front row seat. His mouth was slightly open. His brow was furrowed in the confused, almost angry way of a man who believes there has been a mistake. He looked at the pastor as if expecting the pastor to do something about this. The pastor was a small, gentle man in his 60s who had married my father and Diane 14 years earlier. The pastor's mouth was also open. My father looked back at the Marines. He scanned the column. He clearly believed, in that first second, that this must be some kind of military honor guard for someone else, that perhaps Caleb had a fraternity brother in the service. Or that this was a misrouted ceremony. Then his eyes drifted, almost by accident, to row 14. To me. I was looking straight at him. I did not stand. I did not move. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my mother's handkerchief in my fist, and I looked at my father across 40 feet of stunned silence. His face changed. I have watched men's faces change in many bad situations. I have watched a captured insurgent realize his cover is blown. I have watched a contractor realize the documents in front of him cannot be explained away. I have watched a senator realize, in a closed briefing, that the country he thought he understood is not the country he is actually running. I had never watched my father's face change before. Not like that. Not in that particular way. He understood. Not all of it. But enough. He understood that those 200 Marines were not here for Caleb. He understood that they were here for me. And he understood, in some small and terrible corner of his mind, that he did not actually know who his daughter was. Colonel Hale reached row 14. He stopped. The column behind him stopped. The entire left side of the church stopped, perfectly, in step. He turned a sharp 90 degrees to face me. His heels clicked together. His right hand came up in a salute so crisp it could have cut paper. "Colonel Whitfield," he said. His voice carried through the church without being loud. "Apologies for the interruption, The detachment is in position, as requested." The word colonel hit the church like a stone dropped in still water. I heard someone behind me whisper, "A colonel?" I heard Diane, in the front row, make a small, strangled sound. I heard my father say, very quietly, "E what?" I stood up. I returned Colonel Hale's salute. "Thank you, Colonel. At ease. Take your positions." He pivoted. The columns resumed. They moved to the side aisles and the back of the church, and they took up standing positions along the walls, a wall of dress blues lining both sides of the sanctuary. 200 Marines standing at parade rest as silently as if they had been carved into the stone. I did not sit back down. I looked at Caleb, at the altar. He was crying. Quietly. The way a man cries when he has been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone has finally helped him set it down. I looked at my father. He was staring at me as if he had never seen me before. Which, in a sense, he had not. I walked out of row 14. I walked up the center aisle. Past the cousins I had not seen since I was 11. Past the great-aunts. Past Diane, whose mouth was now fully open and whose perfectly powdered face had gone the color of skim milk. Past Camille, who was clutching her bouquet against her chest and whose eyes were enormous. I stopped at the front row. I looked down at my father. "Dad," I said. My voice was steady. Calmer than I expected. "I believe you have my seat." My father stood up. He stood up because he did not know what else to do. His hands were shaking. He was 63 years old, and he was a regional sales manager for an industrial parts company in a small Ohio town. And he had just realized in front of 300 wedding guests and 200 Marines that his daughter outranked every officer in the room. "Reagan," he started. "Sit down, Dad," I said gently. "Not in my seat. In Camille's seat. There's room next to Diane." Camille made a small, indignant sound. "This is ridiculous. This is my brother's wedding and you're making it about. He's my brother, Camille," I said. "Not yours. He has never been yours." Camille's mouth opened and closed. "I want to be careful here. I want to be honest about what I felt. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel the bright, sharp pleasure I had imagined I would feel. I felt something quieter and older. I felt sad. I felt sad for my father, who had spent 14 years polishing the wrong daughter. I felt sad for Camille, who had been raised by Diane to believe that other people's families were furniture she was allowed to rearrange. I felt sad for myself, for the years I had spent in row 14 of my own life. But I also felt, finally, that I was standing in the right place. I did not need to humiliate my father further. The Marines lining the walls had already done that, just by existing. Every guest in that church was going to spend the next 30 years asking each other, "Do you remember Caleb Whitfield's wedding? Do you remember what happened?" My father moved. Slowly. He stepped sideways out of the front row seat. He did not look at Camille. He did not look at Diane. He looked at the floor. Camille did not move. She sat in her seat with her chin lifted, as if refusing to acknowledge the change in the room would somehow undo it. Diane leaned over and whispered something sharp into her ear. Camille's lips trembled. She stood up. She walked past me without making eye contact, and she sat down in row 3, next to a second cousin who scooted away from her by a few inches. I sat down in the front row. I placed my mother's handkerchief in my lap. The pastor cleared his throat. He looked at me. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the Marines standing along the walls. He was a kind man, and he had been doing this job for 40 years, and I think he understood, in that moment, that this was not the wedding he had rehearsed for. He took a slow breath, and he smiled, the small, brave smile of a professional adjusting to a new reality. "Well," he said, "shall we continue?" There was a soft, surprised laugh from the crowd. The tension in the room cracked, just a little. Caleb wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. The bride's father, in the second row, gave me a long, slow look, and then nodded once, as if to say, "I see you." The bride came down the aisle. She was beautiful. Her name was Hannah. She was a pediatric nurse. She had insisted, 6 months earlier, that I be in the wedding photos even though my father had originally not put me on the family side of the list. She had loved my brother since they were in college, and she had told me once, on a phone call, that she had been waiting a long time to meet the sister he talked about so much. She walked past the columns of Marines without flinching. When she reached the altar, she looked at Caleb, and then she looked at me, and she gave me the smallest, warmest smile I have ever received from another woman. The ceremony continued. The vows were said. Rings were exchanged. The pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and the church bells rang, and 200 Marines remained perfectly still along the walls, witnesses to a marriage and to something else entirely. But there was one more thing. When the ceremony ended and the recessional music began, Caleb did not walk straight down the aisle with Hannah. He paused. He looked at me. He said, loud enough for the front rows to hear, Reagan. Walk with us. I shook my head. It's your day, Caleb. It was always supposed to be your day too, he said. Walk with us. So I did. I walked behind my brother and his new wife, down the center aisle, between two walls of Marines who, as I passed, came to attention in a single, rolling wave. 200 sets of heels striking the marble at the exact same instant. The sound was like thunder rolling through a small wooden room. My father, in row 1, sat down hard. His hands were in his lap. He was crying. He was not crying loud, but he was crying, in the particular way that older men cry when they finally understand something they should have understood a long time ago. I did not look at him as I passed. Not yet. The reception was held in a large white tent on the grounds of a country club that my father had picked because Diane liked the chandeliers in the ballroom. Half the Marines had been quietly dismissed back to their transport buses after the ceremony. The other half, by Colonel Hale's quiet arrangement, were stationed at the entrance to the tent, not as a guard, but as a courtesy. Caleb had requested it. He wanted, he told me later, every single person who underestimated you to see you walk into that tent. I did not walk in like a soldier. I walked in like a sister. I held Aunt Pearl's arm. She was crying a little, in her quiet way, and she kept patting my hand. People moved aside when I passed. Not because I asked them to. They just did. I sat at the family table, the one closest to the dance floor. My father was at that table. So was Diane. So was Camille. Caleb had refused to change the seating chart. Refused, he told me, because he wanted them to sit there and feel every single second of it. I did not realize, until I sat down, that my father had been waiting to speak to me. He had a glass of water in front of him. He had not touched the wine. His hands were folded on the table. He was wearing the same charcoal suit he had worn at my mother's funeral, and I had not noticed until just then. Reagan, he said. I looked at him. Colonel, he said. He said it like a foreign word he was trying to pronounce correctly. You're a colonel. Yes. In the Marine Corps. Yes, Dad. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet, but he was holding himself together. How long? How long what? How long have you been? He searched for the word. Important? I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither. I said, Dad. I have always been important. You just stopped looking. He flinched. Not dramatically. The small flinch of a man who has been told something he already knew and has been hoping he would not have to hear out loud. Diane, beside him, was very quiet. She was reading her napkin. I had never seen Diane be quiet at a family dinner. It was, in its own way, the most satisfying small thing of the night. Camille had not yet been seated. She was standing near the bar with her arms crossed, talking to someone on her phone. I assumed she was trying to call her own mother for backup, and then I remembered that her own mother was at the table reading the napkin. Reagan, I want to, and my father started. Not tonight, Dad, I said. Please. Not tonight. I said it gently. I was not punishing him by refusing the conversation. I simply knew that whatever he was about to say, whatever apology he had assembled in the 4 to 5 minutes between the ceremony and the reception, was not yet the apology I needed to hear. It was the apology of a man who had been embarrassed in public. The apology I needed would have to come later, when he had sat alone in a quiet room and thought about not the colonel he had just discovered, but the daughter he had spent 14 years pretending not to see. Sometime, I said. But not tonight. Tonight is for Caleb. He nodded slowly. He picked up his water glass. His hand was still shaking. Caleb and Hannah came over. Caleb sat down across from me and reached for my hand. "Reeg," he said, "are you good?" "I'm good." "You sure?" "Yes." He looked at our father, and then he looked at me. "I'm sorry it took this long," he said. "I'm sorry I let it go on this long." "You didn't let anything go on," I said. "You're the one who finally stopped it." He squeezed my hand. The reception passed in the strange, slowed way that important nights pass. The first dance happened. The toasts happened. Caleb, in his speech, said the words my sister, Colonel Reagan Whitfield, who was the bravest person I have ever known, and 300 people clapped, and Aunt Pearl pressed her hands to her chest. And my father stared at his plate. Camille, when her turn came to give her toast, declined. She said she felt sick. She left the tent. Diane went after her. They did not come back for almost an hour. I did not feel triumphant about that, either. I felt mostly tired. Around 9 p.m., I stepped outside the tent to get some air. The October sky was clear and full of stars. Colonel Hale was standing at parade rest near one of the side entrances, in case I needed him. I told him to stand down, to take his men back to the buses, to thank them all for me personally. He said, "They are honored." I said, "Tell them their colonel is honored." He saluted. He left. I stood alone in the cold for a moment. And then I heard footsteps behind me. Light, hesitant footsteps. Not my father's. It was Camille. She had taken off her heels. She was holding them in one hand. Her makeup was smeared, and her eyes were red, and she looked, for the first time in 14 years, like a person and not like a performance. "Reagan," she said. I waited. I didn't know. "I know you didn't." My mom said, she stopped. She wiped her nose with the back of her wrist. My mom said you didn't really care about the family. She said you'd left. She said you were cold. She said, Camille, I said. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at me. For a long moment, she just looked at me. The kind of look that takes inventory of a person from the inside. I think it was the first time she had ever really looked at me. "Because I want you to know I didn't take your seat to hurt you," she said. "I took it because I thought I was supposed to. I thought that's what we were. I thought we were the family and you were the visitor. And now? And now I don't know what I am." I did not pity her. I did not hate her, either. I felt the strange flat thing I always feel when I meet a person who has spent a long time inside a story someone else wrote for them. "Camille," I said. "Listen to me carefully. You are not my sister. We were never going to be sisters. Your mother married my father, and you and I were both teenagers, and we did the best we could. But you are not my sister, and you have never treated me as one. So tonight, when you say you didn't know, I believe you. I believe Diane raised you to believe certain things, and you believed them, and you are now in a parking lot in October without your shoes on, finding out those things were not true. She started to cry. But, I said, this is not the moment for me to comfort you. This is the moment for you to go home and think about your own life. About who you want to be when no one is watching. About whether the woman who raised you to take other people's seats is a woman you actually want to keep listening to. She nodded. She put one hand on my arm, lightly, the way Diane had touched my elbow that morning, but for a completely different reason, and she said, I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I know, I said. She walked back toward the tent in her bare feet. I stayed in the cold a while longer. I thought about a lot of things, standing out there. I thought about my mother. I thought about her piano. I thought about the 4 small dents in the carpet that had been carpeted over since. I thought about the morning I left for boot camp, and the letter I had left on the kitchen counter, and how I had signed it I love you, Dad, even though I had not been sure he loved me back. And I thought about a small wooden box I had brought with me to Caleb's wedding. A box I had not yet shown to anyone. A box that contained something my mother had given me 3 days before she died, with the instruction, give this to your father only when he is ready to hear it. You will know when. I had carried that box for 13 years. I was not yet sure if tonight was the night. It was almost 11 when my father found me. The reception had thinned. Caleb and Hannah had been sent off in a car with cans tied to the bumper. The Marines were long gone. The tent was being slowly dismantled by the catering crew. He came out alone. No Diane. No Camille. Just him, in his charcoal suit, with his tie loosened and his eyes hollow. He sat down on the bench beside me. For a long time, he did not say anything. Then he said, I sold the piano because I couldn't stand looking at it. I had not expected that. I had expected an apology. I had not expected this. It hurt too much, he said. Every time I walked into the living room, I expected to see her sitting there. Playing that little Chopin thing she always played on Sunday afternoons. The nocturne. The slow one. I would walk in, and the piano would be there, and she wouldn't, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep doing it. So I sold it. I told myself it was practical. You told me it took up too much space, I said. I lied, he said. I lied to you and I lied to myself. I did not say anything. I was so afraid of grieving her, he said, that I think I started grieving you too. You looked like her, Reagan. You sounded like her. You had her hands. And every time I looked at you, I couldn't do it. So I let Diane in. And Diane brought Camille. And Camille was easy. Camille was loud and bright, and she didn't remind me of anything. And I let your mother's memory and your face and our whole life with her get pushed into the back room of the house. And I told myself it was practical. He was crying now. And then today, he said, I sat in your seat. I sat in your seat, Reagan. And I watched 200 Marines walk into a church for my daughter. And I realized I have spent 14 years sitting in your seat. And calling it mine. I looked at him. I reached into my purse. I took out the small wooden box. It was made of cherry. It was about the size of a paperback book. My mother had carved her initials, EW, into the lid with a small knife when she was 17. I had watched her do it. I set the box on the bench between us. Mom gave me this 3 days before she died, I said. She told me to give it to you when you were ready to hear what was inside. He stared at the box. Open it, I said. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the small clasp. Inside the box was a single envelope. The paper had yellowed at the edges. My mother's handwriting was on the front. To Raymond, when our daughter is ready to be known. He unfolded the letter. He read it. I watched his eyes move slowly down the page. I had read it once, 13 years ago. I had not read it again since. But I remembered every word. My mother had written, in her careful, music teacher handwriting, about the daughter she was leaving behind. She had written that she knew Raymond did not always know what to do with me. That I was quiet and stubborn, and that I carried things inside that he sometimes mistook for coldness. She had written that she had a feeling, even then, that I would do something with my life that he would not understand. That I might choose a path that frightened him. That I might disappear into work or service or some kind of duty. And she had asked him, in the letter, for one thing. Raymond, she had written, whatever she becomes, whatever she chooses, you only have one job. You have to keep her seat at the table. You have to make sure that when she comes home, there is a chair waiting for her. Not a chair you give to someone else because it is more convenient. A chair that is hers. Because she will not ask for it. She does not know how. But she will need it. And if you do not keep it for her, she will spend her whole life believing she does not belong anywhere. My father set the letter down on his knee. He covered his face with his hands. He did not say anything for a very long time. The tent in the distance was being folded up. A wind was moving through the parking lot. Somewhere, a car door closed. When he finally lowered his hands, he said, She knew. She knew before I did. She always did. Reagan, he stopped. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it, Dad. You can't fix 14 years in a parking lot. You can't fix it tonight. You can't fix it next week. You probably can't fix it at all in the way you mean. He nodded. He had expected that, I think. But, I said, if you want to try, you can start with something small. Anything. Sell the new house, I said. His head jerked up. What? Sell the house Diane bought with you. Move somewhere smaller. And put a piano in it. Not Mom's piano. A new one. Or a used one. I don't care. Just put a piano in your living room and learn to live with it being there. He stared at me. I picked up the letter. I folded it carefully and put it back in the box. I closed the lid. And when you're ready to talk again, I said, really talk, not at a wedding, not in a parking lot, not in front of Diane, you can call me. I will pick up. I am not closing the door on you, Dad. But I am not walking through it tonight. I stood up. I left the box on the bench beside him. I walked back toward my rental car. He did not call after me. He just sat there, on a bench outside a wedding tent in October, with my mother's letter in his hand and the small wooden box closed beside him. I do not know how long he stayed. A year has passed since my brother's wedding. A lot of things changed, and a lot of things did not. I want to tell you the truth about both. My father did sell the house. Not the big one Diane had picked out, exactly. He could not afford to start over completely. But he downsized. He moved into a smaller place on the edge of town, with a sunroom and a small yard and a used upright piano he bought from an estate sale. He told me, on the phone, that he could not play. That he had never been able to play. That he sat in the sunroom most evenings with a cup of coffee and listened to the piano not being played, and that sometimes, if he closed his eyes, he could almost hear the nocturne. Diane filed for separation 8 months after the wedding. I will not pretend I was sorry. I will not pretend I was glad, either. People are complicated, and Diane was not a villain in a cartoon. She was a woman who had married a grieving man and built her life on the assumption that the grief made her indispensable. When the grief shifted, the foundation shifted, and the marriage could not hold it. Last I heard, she had moved to Florida. Camille and I are not friends. We are not enemies, either. We exchange short, polite messages on birthdays. She is in therapy. She told me that, in one of the messages, almost as an offering. She is also, from what I can tell, no longer in brand consulting. She works at a children's hospital now, in administration. I do not know if she is happier. I hope she is. Caleb and Hannah are expecting their first child in the spring. A girl. They have asked me to be the godmother. They have also told me, in a way that made me laugh and then made me cry, that the baby's middle name will be Eleanor. The Marines I commanded that day still serve, most of them. Colonel Hale retired 6 months ago and now lives in North Carolina with his wife and 3 daughters. He sent me a Christmas card that read, in his careful block handwriting, it was the proudest formation of my career. Semper Fi. I keep the card on my desk. My father and I talk on the phone now, about once every 2 weeks. The conversations are short. They are not warm, exactly. But they are real. He asks me about my work, and I tell him what I can. He tells me about the piano he cannot play, and I listen. We are not pretending anymore. That feels like more than I had this time last year. In July, I drove out to see him. He had asked, carefully, if I might come for a weekend. I went. I stayed 2 days. We did not talk about the wedding. We talked about my mother. We talked about her favorite songs and the books she used to read at the kitchen table and the way she always burned the cornbread on the first try and got it right on the second. We laughed once or twice. He cried more than I did. On the last morning, before I left, he walked me out to my car. He stood with his hands in his pockets, and he looked smaller than I remembered him being. Reagan, he said. Thank you for coming home. I said, it was not easy. He said, I know. He said, I want you to know something. I have spent the last year thinking about the seat. About what your mother wrote. About what I did. And I want you to know, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything. I just want you to know that for the rest of my life, there is a seat at my table for you. And I will not give it to anyone else. Ever. For any reason. I looked at him for a long time. I said, I know, Dad. I drove away. I want to end with this. People sometimes ask me, when they hear the story, usually after a glass of wine, usually in a quiet room, whether I regret what I did at the church. Whether I think it was too much. Whether 200 Marines was a kind of overkill for one seating chart and one fragile, foolish father. I always answer the same way. I did not bring the Marines for the seat. I did not bring them for revenge. I did not bring them to humiliate my father, although I will not pretend it did not, in some small way, feel like justice. I brought them because my brother asked me to, And because for the first time in my adult life, I let someone who loved me protect me out loud. I brought them because there is a version of me, the 17-year-old in a black dress at her mother's funeral, who was never going to be allowed to disappear into row 14 forever. I brought them, in the end, because of a letter my mother wrote 13 years before, asking my father to save me a seat. He did not save it. So I had to walk in with 200 people behind me and take it myself. That is not revenge. That is something quieter and older. That is a daughter, finally, coming home. And the seat I sit in now, the seat at my own table, in my own house, in the life I have built with my own hands, I built that seat myself. Nobody can move me out of it. Nobody can hand it to a stepsister. Nobody can turn the name card face down. I sit in it every day. And sometimes, on Sunday afternoons, I play a little chopin. The slow nocturne. The one my mother used to play. I am not very good at it. But I am getting better.